The pen barely made a sound when it touched the paper. No tears. No trembling hands. No last desperate plea. Lena Carter signed her name on the divorce papers with the same quiet calm she had worn like armor for 3 years. And then she set the pen down on the table, looked up at the man she had loved with every part of herself and said nothing. I promise my mom to get to 1,000 subscribers before Easter. Please support me by subscribing, liking, commenting where you are watching from. Thank you for watching. Daniel Hayes did not even look at her when he picked up the papers. He just exhaled, slow, relieved, like a man who had finally put down a heavy bag he had been carrying for too long. And in that single breath, Lena heard everything she needed to hear. He was the bag. He had always been the bag. She stood up from the chair, smoothed the front of her plain gray dress, and walked out of the dining room without looking back. Behind her, the Hayes family mansion buzzed with low murmurs and the quiet clinking of glasses. It was a family gathering after all. There had been guests. There had been witnesses. And every single one of them had watched Daniel Hayes place divorce papers in front of his wife like a receipt for something he no longer wanted. Vanessa Moore stood near the fireplace with a glass of red wine and a smile she tried very hard to hide. He did not try hard enough. Nobody stopped Lena as she walked to the front door. Nobody called her name. Nobody asked if she was okay. The housekeeper, an older woman named Mrs. Park who had always been quietly kind, reached out and briefly touched Lena's wrist as she passed. That was all. One small, wordless gesture from the only person in that house who saw her as a human being. Lena stepped out into the cold night air and did not cry until she was 3 blocks away, hidden in the shadow of a bus shelter with no one around to see her fall apart. She allowed herself exactly 7 minutes. Then she straightened her spine, wiped her face and pulled out her phone. She scrolled to a number she had not dialed in 3 years. Her thumb hovered over it for a long moment. She pressed call. It rang once. Lena. The voice on the other end was deep and familiar, warm in the way that only family can be warm, carrying the weight of years and love and a hurt that had never fully healed. Are you ready to come home? She closed her eyes against the cold wind. Yes, she said. I'm ready. 3 years earlier, Lena Carter had done the most reckless thing a girl from her world could do. She had walked away from all of it. The Carter name, the Carter fortune, the private jets and penthouse suites and charity galas where powerful men spoke in quiet voices and moved the world with a handshake. She had packed a single suitcase, transferred enough money to live modestly for 6 months, and disappeared into an ordinary life. She had done it because of Daniel. She had met him at a tech conference, not as Lena Carter, heiress, but as Lena, the quiet woman in the back row who asked the sharpest question during the Q&A panel. He had found her afterward, coffee in hand, eyes bright with the kind of genuine curiosity she had never encountered before. He was building something, he said. Something real. And for the first time in her life, someone was talking to her like she was a person and not a portfolio. They dated for 4 months. She never told him who she really was. She told herself it was because she wanted to be loved for herself. And that was true. But there was also something intoxicating about being ordinary. About grocery shopping and cooking bad pasta and arguing over which television show to watch. About a life that was small and warm and entirely hers. When he proposed, she said yes. When she called her family, her older brother Alexander had gone very quiet on the phone before he spoke. Lena, he said carefully, do you know what you're doing? She told him she did. He told her he would always be there when she needed him. It was not a threat. It was not a warning. It was simply Alexander. Solid and steady and always watching from a distance, the way older brothers do when they know they cannot stop something but refuse to abandon the person walking into it. She moved into Daniel's apartment. Later, into the Hayes family home after the company started growing. She cooked, she cleaned, she smiled at family dinners, and she absorbed 3 years of Margaret Hayes, Daniel's mother, looking her up and down like she was something that had been tracked in on someone's shoe. Where exactly is your family from, dear? Margaret would ask, already bored with the answer before it came. Just a small town, Lena would say. Always the same answer. Always the same small smile. Always the same careful silence. She was very good at keeping secrets. She was even better at keeping herself small enough to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold her. Vanessa Moore arrived on a Tuesday. Lena saw her for the first time in the Hayes family living room. Tall, polished, wearing a silk blouse that cost more than Lena's entire wardrobe and carrying the kind of confidence that comes not from effort but from never having been told no. She had been abroad for years, building her own social empire in Milan and Paris. And now she had come back to Seoul with her designer luggage and her old history with Daniel, and she walked into the Hayes house like she had never left. Margaret Hayes lit up like a woman who had just remembered where she left something precious. "Vanessa," she said, reaching for the younger woman's hands. "You look absolutely stunning." "Doesn't she look stunning, Daniel?" Daniel, to his credit, had looked uncomfortable. He had glanced at Lena from across the room with something in his eyes that might have been an apology. But he did not say anything to correct his mother. He did not reach for Lena's hand or come to stand beside her. He just stood there, caught between two worlds, and Lena watched him choose the path of least resistance the way he always did. After that, things moved quickly. Dinners where Vanessa was always conveniently invited. Business events where she appeared at Daniel's elbow. Small comments from Margaret. "Vanessa has such an eye for business, Daniel really could use that perspective," dropped like seeds into soil that had been carefully prepared to receive them. Lena watched it all. She said nothing. He was good at that. Then came the rumors. It started with whispers at the office. Someone had been leaking product data to a competitor. Sales projections. Development timelines. Proprietary algorithms that had taken Daniel's team 2 years to build. The leak had been precise and deliberate, and it had done real damage. Daniel lost a major client. 2 investors called to express concern. The company, which had been on the edge of its biggest funding round, suddenly looked unstable. Lena heard the whispers 3 days before Daniel confronted her about them. She had not leaked anything. She had never once accessed company files she was not supposed to see, never passed a document to anyone, never done a single thing to harm the business her husband had built. But she also understood with a cold clarity that settled into her bones, that the truth was not the point. The damage was already done. The story was already spreading. And someone had worked very hard to make sure it pointed directly at her. She thought about Vanessa's smile during that first dinner. The way it had been just a little too knowing. She began to put the pieces together, and the picture they formed made her sick. The family gathering had been Margaret's idea, of course. Lena had known something was wrong the moment she walked into the room. The energy was off, too quiet, too careful, with people avoiding her eyes in the particular way people do when they know something you don't. She had found her seat and waited, hands folded in her lap, and told herself to stay calm. Vanessa had stood up halfway through dinner. She had done it perfectly. The reluctant pause before speaking, the look of pained concern she arranged on her face like a costume. She said she hated to bring this up, that it broke her heart, but that she felt a responsibility to the Hayes family and to Daniel's company. She said she had discovered evidence that Lena had been passing sensitive company data to a rival tech firm. She said she had documents. She said she was so sorry. The room had gone very still. Lena had looked at Vanessa and felt something cold and absolute settle inside her chest. Not rage. Not panic. Just a deep, quiet knowing. This was it. This was the ending of this particular story. She had turned to Daniel. He was already looking at the table. In front of him, she did not know when it had appeared, were the divorce papers. Pre-prepared. Neatly folded. Waiting. He slid them toward her without meeting her eyes. "Lena," he said quietly, "I think it's better if we—" "You don't have to explain," she said. She reached for the pen. She signed. She set the pen down. She stood up and left. And the only sound in the entire room was the soft click of her heels on the marble floor. The convoy arrived at 7:15 the next morning. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows pulled up outside the small apartment complex where Lena had been staying. A place she had rented 6 months ago when the tension in the Hayes house had become unbearable, telling Daniel she needed space to think. He had not argued. That should have told her everything. The lead driver stepped out first, then held the door. And then Alexander Carter unfolded himself from the back seat. 6 feet 3 inches of quiet authority, wearing a charcoal suit that fit like it had been made specifically to intimidate everyone in a room. He looked exactly as Lena remembered. Calm, sharp, and utterly, completely in control. He looked at her for a moment. Then he opened his arms. She walked into them and held on for longer than she had planned to. "I've got you," he said simply against her hair. "Come home." He came home. The Carter estate was exactly as she had left it. Vast and beautiful, set behind iron gates on a private road outside the city, surrounded by grounds that were immaculate in every season. Her old room had been kept. Her name was still on her office door on the 34th floor of Carter Global's headquarters. She had been gone for 3 years and the family had simply waited. That first week she slept for 12 hours a night and ate meals that a private chef prepared specifically for her and let her mother hold her hands and not ask any questions. Her father, a quiet and powerful man who had learned the hard way that his youngest daughter could not be directed, only supported, came to sit with her on the second evening and said only, "Whatever you need from us. Anything at all." She told him what she needed. He nodded slowly and called Alexander. By the following Monday, Lena Carter had officially resumed her position as executive director of Carter Global's international division, a role that had been held in reserve, managed by a trusted deputy for 3 years. She walked into the headquarters in a dark navy suit, her hair up, her expression composed, and every person in that building who had grown up reading financial news recognized the name on her visitor badge. The quiet woman who had spent 3 years being mocked in the Hayes household was, as it turned out, one of the most powerful women in the country. She had simply chosen not to use it. Till now. Daniel Hayes noticed the first problem 3 weeks after the divorce. It started with a phone call from Meridian Capital, one of his largest investors, a firm that had been with him since his first funding round. The call was brief and clinical. Meridian was exercising its right to withdraw from the upcoming funding round. No detailed explanation. Sincere apologies. Best of luck. He told himself it was a market fluctuation. Then Eastbridge Partners called. Same message. Same tone. Same hollow goodbye. Then 3 mid-tier investors pulled out inside a single week, and his lead bank contact stopped returning his calls, and the manufacturing partner he had spent 8 months negotiating with sent a politely worded email saying they were reassessing the partnership at this time. Daniel sat at his desk and looked at the numbers and felt something he had not felt since he was 22 years old and starting from nothing. The specific cold dread of watching something you built with your hands begin to crack at the foundation. He hired a private analyst to trace the money. He needed to understand the pattern. The analyst came back in 10 days with a report that Daniel read 3 times before he could fully absorb what it said. Every major investor who had withdrawn was connected, in some way through some holding company or subsidiary or investment vehicle, to a single parent entity. Some connections were direct. Some were 3 or 4 degrees removed. But they all led to the same place. Carter Global. He stared at that name for a very long time. He had heard of Carter Global. Everyone in business had heard of Carter Global. The Carter family was one of the most powerful private dynasties in the country. Old money layered over new, a trillion-dollar empire built across finance, real estate, technology, and logistics. They were the kind of family that shaped markets without appearing in them, that moved in the background of major decisions like a tide that you only noticed when it pulled the ground out from under you. He had never had any reason to connect them to his life. Till now. He searched the Carter family name. He found the patriarch Edward Carter and his wife. He found Alexander Carter, the eldest son, CEO of Carter Global, photographed at international summits beside heads of state. He found the Carter siblings listed in a profile piece. Their names, their roles, their known public appearances. The youngest daughter, the article mentioned, had taken a leave of absence several years ago for personal reasons. She had recently returned to the company in an executive capacity. Her name was Lena. Lena Carter. Daniel put his phone face down on the desk and sat very still for a long time. He thought about the woman who had made him coffee every morning for 3 years. Who had listened to him talk about his business plans with genuine interest. Who had never once asked him for anything. Who had signed divorce papers in front of his entire family without shedding a single tear. Who had never told him her last name was Carter. He pressed his palms flat against the desk and breathed. The truth about Vanessa came from his own CFO. Her name was Ji-young, and she was meticulous and loyal and had been quietly troubled for several weeks by certain anomalies in the company's internal data logs. She brought the information to Daniel on a Friday afternoon with the careful expression of someone delivering news they know will be painful. The data leak had not come from Lena. Ji-young had traced it, carefully, slowly, following the digital footprints through the company's internal systems, to a set of access credentials that had been used in a pattern inconsistent with any current employee. Someone had used an old guest access profile that had never been properly deactivated. Someone who had visited the office several times as a guest, who had been given access to common areas and, on at least one occasion, to a system terminal that should have been locked. That someone was Vanessa Moore. She had leaked the data herself, not to damage Daniel's company permanently, but to create the appearance of a crisis. To give herself a reason to come forward with evidence. To frame Lena precisely and cleanly and at exactly the right moment. And then, Jiyoung hesitated here, her voice carefully neutral. She had been moving funds. Small amounts at first, routed through vendor accounts with slight name variations. Then larger. A company credit facility that Daniel had approved for operational expenses had been accessed repeatedly over the past 4 months. Vanessa had taken $3.7 million. Her phone was off. Her apartment was empty. Her social media had gone dark 48 hours ago. She was gone. Daniel sat with this information for a very long time. Long enough for Jiyoung to quietly leave the room and close the door behind her. Long enough for the light through the office windows to shift from afternoon gold to the flat gray of early evening. He thought about Lena. About the expression on her face when she signed the papers. About how calm she had been. Not the calm of someone who felt nothing, but the calm of someone who felt everything and had decided that none of the people in that room deserved to see it. He thought about what she had given up. 3 years of her life. 3 years of her real life. Living quietly in his shadow, absorbing his mother's contempt, cooking dinners for people who looked through her, all because she had wanted something real. And he had handed her divorce papers across a dinner table. He pressed his fist against his mouth and stared at nothing. The International Business Leaders Summit was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel, a towering glass building in the center of the financial district. Daniel had nearly canceled his attendance. His company was hemorrhaging support, the funding round was in ruins and he had nothing to announce and no one left to impress. But his lawyer advised him to maintain public visibility, to project stability even as the structure beneath him cracked. So he went. He walked into the main hall with his shoulders straight and his expression composed and his chest hollow. He saw her from across the room. She had just entered through the far set of doors, and the effect of her arrival was something Daniel had no framework for, because the woman walking through that room was not the Lena he had known. Or rather, she was Lena completely, fully, finally, without the careful smallness she had always worn in his presence. She wore a deep charcoal suit, structured and precise, with a single strand of pearls and her hair swept up the way it had been on the day they got married. She was flanked by 2 senior executives from Carter Global and moving through the crowd with the kind of ease that cannot be learned or performed, only lived. People stopped their conversations to greet her. A minister she passed shook her hand with both of his. The head of a major Korean conglomerate bowed slightly as she spoke to him. She was not performing power. She simply had it. Daniel stood with a glass of water going warm in his hand and felt the floor shift beneath him. She saw him. For one fraction of a second, less than a heartbeat, something moved across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by that same composed calm, and she looked away and continued her conversation as though he were simply another face in a room full of strangers. Which Daniel understood with sudden and terrible clarity, was exactly what he was to her now. He tried to approach her once. She was between conversations, standing near a window with a glass of water. He crossed the room and stopped a few feet away and said her name. Lena. She turned, and her eyes were polite and entirely unreadable. Mr. Hayes, she said. Not Daniel. Mr. Hayes. I hope you're enjoying the summit. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out that was worthy of the moment. She waited 3 seconds with perfect patience, then smiled faintly and said she had to get back to her team, and she walked away, and every step she took felt to Daniel like a door closing. His company lasted another 3 weeks before the final blow fell. The bank called in the outstanding loan. The remaining investors followed. The board voted to appoint a receiver to manage what was left. Daniel signed the paperwork in a room that felt very small, with lawyers on both sides of a table and nobody who was there to support him. His mother did not call. She was dealing, she said through a text message, with her own situation. Vanessa's disappearance had apparently swept Margaret up in its wake, since she had been the one to vouch for Vanessa's trustworthiness and push for her involvement in the company. For the first time in his adult life, Daniel Hayes was alone. Completely, absolutely alone. No company. No investors. No mother managing his social calendar. No Vanessa. No Lena. The rain started on a Thursday evening and did not stop. He drove to the Carter estate without fully deciding to. Or maybe he had been deciding for weeks without admitting it. He parked on the road outside the iron gates and sat in the car for 20 minutes with the engine off and the rain beating down on the roof, and then he got out. He pressed the call button on the gate. A guard's voice. Who's calling? Daniel Hayes. I need to speak with Lena. With Miss Carter. The words felt strange in his mouth. So, he said them. There was a long pause. Long enough that he thought they would simply send him away. Long enough that the rain soaked through his jacket and plastered his hair to his forehead. Then the voice said, "Wait there." He waited. He waited for 1 hour and 14 minutes. He knew the exact time because he kept checking his watch, then forcing himself to stop, then checking again. The rain did not ease. He did not move. He was not going to move. He had given up many things over the past months. His business, his pride, his carefully constructed image of himself as a man who made good decisions. He was not going to give up this. The gate opened. She appeared at the top of the stone steps leading from the house to the drive, framed by the warm light spilling from the entrance hall behind her. She was wearing a simple cream coat, her hair down. She looked at him for a long moment before she descended the steps. She stopped at the bottom a few feet away in the rain. He looked at her. She looked at him. Between them was everything that had happened. 3 years of a marriage, a dinner table, a pen, a signature, a silence. He did not plan what happened next. His body decided before his mind did. Daniel Hayes dropped to his knees on the wet stone of the Carter driveway. His hands were at his sides. The rain ran down his face. He looked up at her. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice cracked on the second word and he let it. He had nothing left to protect. "I'm sorry for all of it. For not seeing you. For not protecting you. For believing them over you without a single question. For making you small when you were never small. I'm sorry for everything, Lena. For every single thing I didn't do and everything I did." He stopped. His throat was too tight to continue. She looked down at him. Her face was composed, but something behind her eyes was moving. Something that she was not quite suppressing the way she usually did. The rain fell between them. "Get up, Daniel," she said finally. Her voice was quiet and steady. He didn't move. "Please," he said. "Tell me there's still something worth fighting for." She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that somewhere inside the house, a light went on in an upstairs window. Long enough that the rain began to ease, dropping from a downpour to a steady whisper. Long enough that Daniel's knees were going numb against the cold stone and he did not care, not even slightly. Lena Carter looked at the man kneeling in the rain before the home she had returned to. She thought about the girl who had packed a single suitcase and chosen love over legacy. She thought about 3 years of small rooms and smaller silences. She thought about a pen in her hand and papers on a table and a man who exhaled in relief when she walked out of his life. She thought about the conversation she'd had with Alexander that morning. "Whatever you decide," her brother had said, "Carter Global stands behind you. The question isn't what we can do to him, Lena. You already know the answer to that." He had paused. "The question is what you want." What did she want? She looked at Daniel, soaked through, stripped of everything, no company left to hide behind and no mother to manage the room and no social position to protect. Just a man on his knees in the rain, saying the words 3 years too late. She thought about whether 3 years too late was the same as never. She thought about whether love that had been this careless deserved another chance. Or whether giving it one was the most dangerous thing she could do. Her hand moved. Just slightly. The smallest possible gesture. She was reaching toward him. Or she was stepping back. In the last moment before it became clear which one it was, headlights swept through the iron gates. The car. Unknown plates. Moving fast. It stopped hard on the gravel and the driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. Rain-soaked, mascara-streaked, expression wild. He looked at Lena. She looked at Daniel on his knees. And then she held up a flash drive in one shaking hand. It was Vanessa Moore. "There's something you both need to see," she said, breathing hard. "Something I didn't tell either of you. Something that changes everything." She looked directly at Lena. "Something about your company. About Carter Global." Her voice dropped. "Someone on the inside has been selling you out. And it's not who you think." The rain fell. Nobody moved. Lena Carter looked from the man on his knees to the woman at the gate to the flash drive catching the light between them, and felt the ground shift beneath everything she thought she knew. The decision she had been about to make would have to wait. Something much bigger had just begun. End of part 1.